Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How are you all doing today, gang? I'm going to let you have a little peek behind the curtain and say that I'm feeling quite bad today because I had one of those senior moments. I was busy working on an article, tapping away at my keyboard, thinking I'd got another 20 minutes till my podcast started. And then I learned that I was 10 minutes late for today's podcast recording, and there was actually a team of people waiting online for the meeting to start. I'm curious, has this ever happened to you? Have I got a bad case of lockdown brain? Thankfully, today's guest, who is the president and CEO of Enterprise DB, accepted my apologies and promised to buy him a cold beer or a hot coffee one day, because I do hate being late for anything. So, Ed, if you do listen back, another apology for you in front of 165 countries. Now, Enterprise DB, or EDB, as you might better know them, is a provider of database management software and services. And Ed has been in the open source world for over 2 decades now. And before EDB, he was at Red Hat, where he held the title of Vice President and General Manager of North America. But his work in the open source world goes back over 2 decades. And for Ed, it isn't just about database technology. It's a movement to enable innovation. And he has amazing leadership and technology vision, not to mention gracious acceptor of apologies from podcast hosts. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the US so we can speak with Ed. So a massive warm welcome to the show.
Hi, Neil. I'm Ed Boyajian. I'm the president and CEO of Enterprise DB. And I've been in open source now for 20 years. My first 7 years were with Red Hat, and then the last, going on 13 years now, here at EDB.
An Enterprise Database is a provider of database management software and services. But for people that are tuning in from anywhere in the world and hearing about EDB for the very first time, could you just tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you solve with technology, and also what makes you different from all those other solutions out there?
So I think, many of your listeners likely have heard of Postgres, but Postgres is an independent open source project, and it's a relational database. And so it's quite prominent and prolific in use. In fact, one of the most popular and most respected databases in the world. And so we've been working to bring kind of commercialize Postgres and bring that to enterprise customers, a lot like Red Hat brings Linux to companies. And in some ways, we think about the work we do as supercharging Postgres. And that, to us, that means a few important things. One, at our core, we're Postgres database developers and architects. So we provide technical leadership, vision, and core development in and around the Postgres project. The second way we supercharge Postgres is we surround Postgres with the software capabilities and other technologies that are needed to deploy Postgres successfully in an enterprise at scale. And that includes things like tools for high availability, tools for enterprise class management at scale, tools for integration, tools for migration, but the software components that you need to surround the database to run it appropriately in large-scale applications. And I think the third way we're helping to supercharge Postgres is really to bring industry brand awareness to Postgres. It's been a project that's been in existence for over 20 years. And while it's quite well known if you're in the database arena and even the developer community, it's much less well known and understood by the C-suite and executives. And so one of the things that we do is engage with analysts and media to help promote Postgres broadly.
Excellent. And one of the things I always try and do on this podcast is, yes, we're talking about technology, but I also try and find out a little bit more about the guests, do a little bit of research on them and their views on things. And when I was researching you, I read that you had this great viewpoint on accepting failure. So for anyone that's not seen that, can I ask that you expand on why all CEOs must really start thinking about and evaluating if their people first approach is actually working right now?
Yeah, it's particularly important in the recent times we find ourselves in, where we really are in a global crisis. But I think at the heart, people, we all know, are what create value in a company. People are the bridge to our customers. They're the enablers of growth, and really the cornerstone of what makes any company successful. I think that the inside that what's interesting is, people are also inherently expected to take on a certain amount of responsibility and risk. And I think depending on the nature of the company, depending on the nature of leadership, and depending on the nature of the people involved, accepting that risk and really taking on the kind of challenges that come with companies, particularly in a crisis, is a really demanding task for a lot of employees. And so we've noticed that when our team really pushes to create better outcomes for our customers and for the company, inherently they got to take on more risk, and we have to give them a wide enough berth to take that risk on. And that means accepting that sometimes that will fail, all of us, and that includes me. But I think in doing that, we really enable people to do their best work. And I think it's easy to miss the opportunity to tune into what's happening. We're very actively staying engaged with our employees. We're working closely with them to understand how well they're doing, particularly now that we're remote and we can't see each other. And we do that through a variety of mechanisms, including employee surveys and assessing where we are with engagement. So I think, as I look across the landscape, I think it's really easy for businesses to get focused exclusively on, one specific metric. Maybe they're focused on costs. At the end of the day, the most important thing to focus on, particularly in a crisis, is the people.
I love that line you used there about people being the bridge to the customer. And something I always say on this podcast is technology works best when it brings people together. So with that in mind, I'm curious, what role do you see open source technology and principles in rebuilding global collaboration?
Yeah, having worked with open source projects now for over 20 years, and granted, I've come at that from a in a sense, from a business perspective, in that I've been engaged heavily in the commercialization of two really important technologies, Linux and now Postgres. Interestingly, those two projects share a very similar attribute, in that they are both independent open source projects. And what I mean by that is those are projects that are not controlled by a single company. There are a lot of open source projects, particularly in the database world today, that are in fact captive to a company. But I think what makes both Postgres and Linux quite successful is they're not controlled by a company. And what the underpinnings of what makes that powerful is the engagement of developers in the project, and it's true in Postgres, is it's driven around transparency, that there's a openness about how everything is done. All the technology is always under peer review, which I think gives it, creates an extraordinary quality in the actual technology and the code. And I think it also improves the speed of development, and that the contributions are measured as a meritocracy. And I think that, those individuals that choose to commit more effort and time are rewarded for that investment of time. I think those attributes, when you think about the concept of transparency, peer review, and meritocracy, can be applied so thoughtfully in any company. And we're seeing more and more companies, I think, embrace that those values in the way they run their businesses, not just in the way that they run their development organizations and operations, but more as how they think about the way to create a healthy environment for people to work in.
And something else that we're hearing more and more about now, and quite rightly so, is that it's more essential than ever to have a diversity of thought and a diverse workforce, especially if you are going to meaningfully serve a diverse audience. Because if your workforce and your school of thought is not as diverse as your audience, you just can't serve them. So do you think tech companies also need to embrace diversity to accelerate innovation too?
I do. I think at EDB, diversity plays a powerful role in how we do our work. We have people in the company from 24 different countries. We serve customers around the world with as much business coming from outside the North America market as comes from within the North America market. And I think you look at the intersection both of the diversity of our customers and the diversity of our staff, you really start to get at what can create a powerful combination. You know, the differences that we have. Obviously, we always rely on the differences in skills to help create something meaningful in technology and products. But I think you go beyond that and you see and experience the differences in cultures, the differences in experiences, the differences in perspectives that you get from bringing people together in projects and teams that live in different parts of the world is incredibly enabling. It's incredibly powerful, but it also means there's a lot of, you have to tend that. It's not, it's not as simple as just assembling people. I mean, we do a lot of work to create a working environment and culture that makes it easy for people to collaborate across such a diverse geography.
Completely agree with you on that. And also with hybrid cloud deployments on the rise now, are there any technologies to consider or anything that particularly excites you at the moment?
Yeah, I think, I think the future of how deployments are going to take shape, as you rightly point out, will be happening around hybrid cloud and microservices. I think microservices are enabled by Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes really is a breakthrough technology for developers and for DevOps. I think that as we look at how the role of developers has evolved in enterprises, have become much more prominent, and appropriately so, that development itself is no longer lives in the domain of IT alone, but rather has been distributed appropriately to much broader areas in the business and down to the business level. And I think Kubernetes is a tool that is a technology that enables a lot of work to be distributed and done more effectively in alignment with how companies are working. But I also think that that companies now more and more are in a major transformation to re-platform. And I think in that process, and we see this particularly in the database category, we are experiencing our customers wanting to move away from legacy vendors and to break the lock-in that they've had, particularly with strong proprietary database companies. But in moving away from them, we see a number of companies who move straight to another cloud platform, for example, and it looks like, and starting to experience, that they're moving from one walled garden, where that was an Oracle walled garden, now to another, dedicated cloud walled garden. And we're finding, as that circumstance evolves, that companies really want to maintain that cost and vendor independence, but to hold on to some of the technologies that they value. And Postgres is playing a pretty important role in that. We have some technology, BDR, bidirectional replication, that really helps our customers stay platform independent, which means they don't need the kind of engineered systems like rack or Exadata that they might get from Oracle, and they don't have to rely exclusively on an underlying cloud platform to do it. So they're able to get extreme high availability and maintain that independence. And I think this is a really important underpinning of what will make hybrid cloud and multi-cloud possible for companies, which really is what I think our customers ultimately want to get to.
And we are right at the beginning of a new year, so I'm going to ask you to stare into your virtual crystal ball here. I know it's a big question, but do you have any predictions for 2021 for Postgres and also the broader open source community?
Yeah, I won't talk specifically about technology, but I will. I think broadly speaking in Postgres, I think we'll start to see, look, Postgres has been widely accepted now and adopted. We've long ago, the markets accepted Postgres as a transformational database to put new workloads on or to migrate away from legacy relationships. I think we'll start to see in 2021 larger scale migrations happening. I think the concept of migration factories starting to come up will be a pattern in 2021, and I think that'll be in support of replatforming the whole stack that we see inside of our customers' environments.
And what's next for EDB? I appreciate there's probably not too much you can share, but is there anything you can share with us today?
Well, look, we see ourselves playing a central role in the success of Postgres in the market. So we'll continue to make significant investments in the work we do in support of the community. We think that is one of the most important things that we do in the context of Postgres. We'll also continue to help our customers move their infrastructure towards Postgres at an accelerated rate. We recently acquired a company, Second Quadrant, who has an extraordinary amount of Postgres talent, and we did that to be supportive of our customers accelerating demand for Postgres. And so now we've brought together the two biggest and best companies in Postgres to deliver on the promise that we've had, that our customers can transform their business with Postgres.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. But before I do let you go, could I ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find out more information online about Enterprise DB, and also, of course, contact your team if they've got any questions?
Sure. You can learn more about EDB at www.enterprisedb.com. And certainly there's a lot of information there that I know would help your listeners learn more, not just about Enterprise DB, but also Postgres.
Well, there's so much I've loved about our conversation today. Like I said earlier, I always say that technology works best when it brings people together, and hearing about the open source community and the technology that helps bring everyone together as well, especially now more than ever, I think it's so important. So a big thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Neil.
A big thank you to Ed for coming on the podcast today and discussing how open source technology and principles are rebuilding global collaboration, and also for discussing Postgres everywhere and why Postgres is a technology to watch, especially with hybrid cloud deployments on the rise, not to mention 2021 predictions for Postgres and the broader open source community. But as always, I always like to throw the virtual microphone at everybody listening. If you've got any views at all, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can get me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But it's time for me to dash off. I don't want to be late for another podcast recording, so I'm going to get out of here quick. So a big thank you to everyone for listening today, and Paul for coming on the podcast. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.